Welcome back, boys and girls. I'm Pastor Matt, here to read Little Pilgrims Progress once again. Last time we were together, we caught up with little Christian. He went through the valley of the shadow of death, and he met up with Faithful. He tried to run too fast, but fell down. Faithful helped him up. And then they met up with Talkative, and thankfully they were able to encourage one another and help each other out to not end up in that place where Talkative was, where they just pay lip service, is what it's called, to the king, and don't actually follow the king in their hearts or in practice. So let's see where they go from here. Chapter 25, the Little Pilgrim meets Evangelist. Soon after they had parted from Talkative, the two little pilgrims came to a wide and desolate plain. No trees grew upon it, and there were no flowers among the short, dry grass. The way of the king went straight across it, and as Christian looked forward, he felt glad that he was not alone, for the path looked long and dreary. But with Faithful for a companion, the time passed quickly, and toward the close of the afternoon, the tired children were glad to find that they were not very far from the border of the plain. Beyond it, the country appeared green and beautiful, and Christian hoped that they might soon come to another one of the king's houses, where they would be allowed to rest until the morning. Presently, Faithful thought he heard footsteps behind him, and looking back, he saw someone whose face seemed like that of an old friend. He stood still for a moment, and then he cried out, "Oh, Christian! Christian! Do you see who is coming after us?" Christian turned also and clapped his hands for joy. "It is Evangelist!" How pleased the boys were to see their good friend once more. Evangelist had much to hear, and he smiled with eagerness while the little pilgrims told him of all that they had seen and done. "The king has been very good to you. You have met with some enemies and some troubles, but he has helped you always, and he will help you still if you trust in him." "Well, I'm sure he will." Faithful only clasped his fingers a little more tightly around those of Evangelist, for he felt shy and half afraid to speak. But Evangelist knew that he loved and trusted the king with all his heart, and that he would be quite as brave as Christian if the servants of the wicked prince were to attack him. "Will you tell us more about the road? Will it be easier now, or are there some other dreadful places to pass through?" Evangelist looked grave. "I came to meet you here, because very soon you will reach the gates of a great city that belongs to the wicked prince. It is a beautiful city full of all kinds of pleasant things, and many pilgrims, when they enter it, are tempted to say, there instead of going on their journey, 'I do not wish you to be so foolish.' So I have come to warn you about it." "Why must we pass through it?" said Faithful. "The wicked prince ordered it to be built on both sides of the king's way, so that the pilgrims cannot possibly get to the celestial city without passing through the very middle of it." "What shall we do then?" "You must walk quietly along the streets. Do not stop to look at the beautiful things in the shops and in the markets. And do not let the children persuade you to play with them. Sometimes the pilgrims are not much troubled by the townspeople, and sometimes they are treated very cruelly." "Would they kill us, do you think?" "They may perhaps put you in prison. And they often have been wicked enough to kill people who would not serve their prince. But do not be afraid. If you have to die there, the king will send his angels, and they will carry you at once to the celestial city. And you will have no more trouble or pain forever." The sun was just setting when Evangelist told the children goodbye, and before its light had faded away, they saw in the distance the walls and gates of a great and strong city. "Are you afraid?" "Not very much. The king will take care of us, and you have your good armor." "Yes, I do. I do wish that you had stayed in Palace Beautiful. Then you would have some armor too." "Never mind. I shall keep close to you, and if the people do kill me, there will be no more enemies to fight." He put his hand in Christian's, and Christian thought of the king and tried not to feel frightened. But he was only a little boy, and as he passed under the wide archway, and heard the heavy gates close behind them, he whispered to Faithful, "I should like Evangelist to be taking hold of my hand now." I keep screwing that up. Okay. He put his hand in Christian's, and Christian thought of the king and tried not to feel frightened. But he was only a little boy, and as he passed under the wide archway and heard the heavy gates close behind them, he whispered to Faithful, "I should like Evangelist to be taking hold of my hand now." And Faithful said, "Yes, perhaps if we had asked him, he would have gone through the city with us. What a pity we did not think of that." Chapter 26. Vanity Fair. You know that the wicked prince hated the good king, who ruled over the celestial city, and it made him very angry to see the pilgrims on their way from his country to that of the king. He had built this city, which was called Vanity Fair, just beyond the dark valley and the wilderness, because he knew that when the pilgrims reached its gates, they would be feeling tired and faint. And he hoped that it would then be easy to persuade them to stay there, instead of going farther on the way to the king. So he filled the great city with everything that was pleasant and beautiful. It had broad streets and handsome houses, and the stalls in its markets were covered with glittering wares. All day long, the people were passing busily up and down. They wore fine clothes and spent their whole time in pleasing themselves, and the wicked prince took care to give them plenty of things to enjoy, so that they might never have a moment to spare in which to think of the king whom they had forsaken. After they had lived in Vanity Fair for a short time, most of the pilgrims forgot the king altogether. And when they saw other pilgrims passing on their way to the celestial city, they were ready to help the servants of the wicked prince in persuading the travelers to give up their journey. It was dark when our two little pilgrims entered the town, so they stayed quietly in a sheltered corner near the gate until the next morning. As soon as the sun rose, they began their walk through the city, for they thought that if they started early, that they might perhaps reach the opposite gate before the streets became crowded with people. But little Christian's bright armor and the white suit that Faithful wore were not like the dress of the children in the Vanity Fair. And the boys had only gone a very short distance before they were noticed by some lads who were strolling idly about. "There are two little pilgrims! Let us go after them and stop them!" Christian and Faithful could hear the boys running behind them, but they did not look around. "Don't let us take any notice. Perhaps they will just speak to us." But when the boys came up, they all gathered closely around the little pilgrims and would not let them pass. "Tell us where you have come from. And who gave you that armor and those white clothes? Why don't you look at those shops? They seem nice, eh? Boys look like you don't want swords and shields. You should sell them and buy some of those beautiful things." Christian scarcely knew what to say, for the boys were all speaking at once, and he felt quite confused. But little Faithful answered bravely, "We don't wish for any of your things. We are going to the celestial city." Then the boys laughed rudely, and one of them pushed Faithful so that he would have fallen if he had not been holding Christian's hand. By this time, many other children had run toward them, and some other people stopped also to see what was the matter. Then one of the wicked prince's servants passed by, and when he saw Christian's shining helmet, he knew that the boys must be pilgrims. So he pushed his way through the crowd and seized them both by their shoulders. "What are you doing? Our prince does not allow children to quarrel in the streets." "We are not quarreling. We were walking along quietly." "That is nonsense. You have caused all this crowd and disturbance. You must come with me." "We are the king's pilgrims. We are not disturbing anybody. We only wish to pass through the city." "I don't know anything about the king's pilgrims," answered the man. "I can see that you two are foolish, troublesome boys, and you must be taken before the governor." So he led them both down the street to the governor's house, and the children of the town followed, laughing and mocking at the poor little pilgrims whom they had brought into such trouble. Chapter 27. the little pilgrims suffer for the king's sake. The governor of the city was one of the wicked prince's chief servants, and he hated the king and his pilgrims almost as much as his master did. When Faithful and Little Christian were brought before him, he was quite glad to think that he had an excuse for hurting someone whom the king loved, and he said, "You are two very bad boys, and you must both be beaten. And afterward you shall be shut up in the iron cage, so that the children of the town may see you and know what will be done to them if they follow your example." It was no use for the little pilgrims to say anything. The tears came into Christian's eyes when he heard the governor's cruel words, and he wondered whether his mother would know what was happening to him. Faithful's cheeks grew very white, but he whispered to Christian, "Evangelist said that they might hurt us, but if we die, we shall go straight to the celestial city. I shall think of the king because he is sure to help me, and I will not cry." Then Christian determined to be brave too, and he remembered the picture he had seen in the house of the interpreter, of the good shepherd whose feet were torn and bleeding. "He is our prince," thought Christian, "and he did not mind the pain. I must not either, because I am the king's servants, and it is written in my book that the king's servants are to be like the prince, not the evil prince, but the king's own son. And although the strokes of the heavy rod made his back and arms feel terribly sore and bruised, he behaved like a brave soldier and did not cry at all." The iron cage was a place in the middle of the market, with bars of iron in front of it so that it looked like a den for wild beasts. After they had been beaten, the little pilgrims had chains fastened upon their hands and feet. And then the man who had charge of them put them into the cage and left them there. They could not stand upright, for they were ill and weak with pain, so they sat down together upon the ground, and each tried to comfort the other by reminding him of the king's promises. "We knew that they would be cruel, but it is for the king's sake, and he will not let them hurt us too much." When the people in the town heard that two of the king's pilgrims were lying in the cage, they were very eager to see them, and soon a crowd of rude boys and girls, and men and women, also gathered around to stare at Faithful and Christian and to mock them in their trouble. The boys of Vanity Fair said all kinds of cruel things to provoke the pilgrims and to make them displease the king by being passionate and angry with their enemies. But Christian and Faithful sat still. Neither of them gave a cross answer to anything that was said. At last, some of the boys, when they saw how patient the little pilgrims were, began to feel ashamed, and they cried out, "Let them alone now! They have been beaten, and it is brave of them not to cry. Don't tease them any more." But the other boys were cruel and liked to see the white faces and trembling lips of the poor little pilgrims, so they went on teasing them and laughing at them until their companions grew angry. And before long, there was a great disturbance in the market. For the boys who were sorry for the pilgrims began to fight with those who were teasing them. The governor was obliged to send his men to stop the fighting, and he ordered Christian and Faithful to be beaten once more, because he said the quarrel had been on their account. Then they were taken back to the cage, where they lay all night in great pain and distress. Well, that's it for this week, boys and girls. Wow, what a cliffhanger. What will happen to Faithful and Little Christian next? This week, I'd like you to discuss with your parents what is happening in this point of the story. So we have Little Christian and Faithful. They meet up with Evangelist, who encourages them and gives them some good advice about what's to come. I want you to talk about with your parents what Vanity Fair is, what the town represents, and the different things that happened along the way. And as the boys didn't give in to the vanity, what happened as a result. Maybe ask your parents, why would the evil prince build such a place, a town, on the path to the celestial city, and how little pilgrims are able to get through it. Anyway, have a great week. Blessings to you. Lots of things to discuss and to think about and pray about. Talk to you next week. Bye.